We thought you'd come with a crown of gold, a string of pearls, the cashmere robe. We thought you'd clench an iron fist and rain like fire on the politics. But without a sword, no armored guard, but common born in mother's arms. The government now rests upon the shoulders of this baby son.
Welcome to the Clifton Worley Show. This week we have John Mark McMillan with us. And first of all, I would just like to ask you how you got to start playing music and what that musical journey was like then.
Yeah, sure. So I started playing music in my teens. I was probably 14 or 15 years old, and I had a buddy of mine was coming over to the house. Too young to drive just yet, I think. So his mom dropped him off, and he got out of the car with a red PV amplifier. No, it was a PV amplifier and a red Strat. It was a Squire Strat, and we took it up to my room, and he could play all the songs off the radio. And I thought, wow, this is great, because I already knew I wasn't good at sports. And up until that point, I'd been mostly into illustration, drawing, comic books, that type of thing. And I'd realized that this hobby of illustration was not going to impress the girls, you know. And so I thought, well, sports is out because I'm terrible at sports. So maybe music is the thing. So I tried to get him to teach me some songs on the radio. I ended up digging up my dad's old guitar. It's old Samick guitar, and I bought magazines at the drugstore, you know, like Guitar Player magazines, and I learned how to play, you know, a bunch of the songs that were on the radio at that time: Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Counting Crows, REM, that kind of stuff. And honestly, that was the beginning of my musical journey right there. Is really just looking for a place to belong and trying to make friends and impress girls, you know.
So for you, it was kind of like there was an end game in mind, and this is going to connect me with people.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say that I was old enough to think about end games. I just thought, hey, this is cool. Maybe it'll make me cool.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. And this was you're from North Carolina, right?
Yep.
So this was so you're here in the South pretty much, and
Yeah.
what now you mentioned some of those early like grunge bands and
Yeah.
stuff. Was that, I mean, in your area, was that kind of the game at the time as far as the background, what you were hearing?
Yeah, totally. I mean, you know, in those days, we only got what was on the radio and what was on MTV.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we weren't old enough to go to shows. You had to be at least 18 to go to a real show. You know, so we didn't really get live music. You had MTV and you had the radio. So you had Top 40 and you had, you know, the rock stations. And what's really interesting is that one little moment in the 90s, you know, the alternative rock was all over Top 40 for a while.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you had, you know, you don't have rock music in the top 40 anymore, you know. So it was that's what I grew up listening to. But you know, I also listened early on. I listened to a lot of R&B, a lot of 90s R&B and rap, and pretty much whatever I could record off the radio. I had my little tape player, and when a song came on the radio that I liked, I would hit play and record. And I had this tape full of those songs that I tracked off of the radio. So that was all I had access to, though, you know.
Right. Well, you mentioned the friend having the electric guitar and amp, but
Yeah.
was the guitar you started on, I mean, were you playing acoustic, electric? What was going on there?
I started on electric. It was my dad's Samick.
Okay.
It was like a $200, $150 Samick electric guitar.
Nice. Now, were you doing like everybody else and trying to, plug into an amp and get as much distortion as you possibly could at that time?
Oh, definitely. My first amp was a PV Rage amp, and yeah, it was. We had a lot of fun. I mowed lawns, saved up my money, and I bought guitar pedals. I bought my first wah pedal. I bought a tube screamer. What's funny is those pedals would actually be worth probably some money if I'd have held on to them.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Well, where did you like? At what point in this you were starting to play music? Did you think, hey, this is kind of for me?
Man, I don't know. To be honest, I think later on in my early 20s, late teens, early 20s, I started playing shows. I started playing it in churches, anywhere that would let me play. And I started writing songs. And after a while, people started asking me for my songs. They're like, is there a CD, that has that song on it? I'd be like, well, no. They're like, how do I get it? And I'm like, man, I don't know. And so after a while, I thought, I need to record something because all these people want to hear this song. And so I really didn't think, I can make money doing this. I mean, I'd hoped I could, in the back of my mind, but really I was like, people want to hear these songs. And so I need to figure out a way for them to have the song. So I recorded a record mostly out of demand. People wanted to listen to the songs. They wanted to have the songs. And so that's how that whole thing started. It's really, I didn't write a bunch of songs thinking, how do I sell these to people? It was like people already wanted the songs. And so I recorded it as sort of a response to that. And that's how my first few records were. I mean, I played the songs and, I didn't know I was going to do another record after my first record. But people kept asking for songs I'd written. They wanted to hear them. And so I would record the record and so they could have it. And after a while, the CDs were a big deal, man. I mean, I could go play a show for like 100 people, you sell like 20 CDs at $18 a piece, like that's pretty good money early on, and then it got to the point where I remember nights selling 100 CDs, it wouldn't be rare to sell 100 CDs a weekend. I'm making $1,500, $1,800 a weekend, selling CDs. Now you don't have that anymore. You know what I mean? That doesn't exist these days. But that's how it started for me, selling CDs out of the trunk of my car. In 2006, my wife and I left our jobs to go out on the road together. And, I did some other things. I taught some guitar lessons early on and tried to make money wherever I could. But honestly, since then, I haven't had a job since 2006. I've just started selling CDs out of the trunk of my car. And, over the years, I've been able to keep the fire alive.
Well, that's interesting. What I want to, I guess, back up a little bit though, and you talked about you're writing these songs, and people wanted to hear them, and so you started recording them and making them available to people. But I want to dig a little bit deeper into what do you think was causing that? What was the desire to create and write songs? Where was that coming from?
I think that. And I know there's a lot of different personality types. People process things differently, right? Mm-hmm. But and I've only come to realize this sort of later in my adult years, but I'm a little bit of a mystery to myself, with the way I feel. I feel things very strongly, but I don't always understand why. And so songs for me became a way to work that stuff out. Not that like I get to the end of a song and be like, oh, I understand now, but songs were like therapy for me. It's able to work through my feelings, late at night, and able to maybe understand myself a little bit better. For me, it was very, it was also like a religious experience, like I felt like I was having some sort of communion with, with the divine, you know, like I'm reaching out into the unknown and trying to understand myself and trying to understand the world, you know. And for me, that's what music has always been, you know.
Well, let's kind of talk about the influences. What was the
Sure.
influence in the way you were sounding and the way you were, you know, writing? What was going on there?
I mean, it really depends on the era, you know, because I listen to a ton of music, you know. So early on, it may have been, you know, I may have been trying to copy those 90s influences, you know, the Counting Crows, Pearl
Mm-hmm.
Jam, you know. At a point there was, you know, like Damien Rice
Right.
and, you know, it's kind of the stuff that was exciting in the, you know, David Gray, stuff that was exciting in the early 2000s. You know, as I grew, I started digging a little deeper. I dug into like Springsteen and Tom Petty, Bob Dylan, you know, and I started pulling more from the folk tradition a little bit more, you know. Um, but you know, and you probably hear a lot of more. You probably hear more of that on the Medicine record and the Economy record. I think Borderland leans, you know, there's a little bit of a Talking Heads meet Springsteen kind of thing that kind of happens, and then there's, you know, maybe some, you know, Fleetwood Mac type of influence happening on Borderland. And I probably carried all that into Mercury and Lightning, except we were also listening to a lot of Prince and a lot of 90s R&B and a lot of reggae and a lot of world music. And so you hear those little inflections and things I want to think throughout that record, you know. So it's, for me, it's grown over time, and I get bored, and I like to dig into new areas and find musical inspiration in places that maybe I haven't before, you know. Like even a song like Death in Reverse. I wanted that song to sound like Stevie Nicks wrote a hymn for Frank Sinatra, you know. And Frank Sinatra, you probably don't hear it very much, but Frank Sinatra had a little bit of inspiration for the song Holy Ghost at the top of Borderland, you know. And so there's a I would say a somewhat of a wide variety of musical influences, though you probably hear some more than others because the way I do it feels, you know, more like Springsteen or more like Bob Dylan, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I want to get back to that in a minute, kind
sure.
of your shifting in sounds and stuff. But before we go there, I wanted to ask you mentioned that you were playing in churches, you were playing venues and stuff, and you you seem to navigate doing both worlds. What kind of what was your journey there like coming up playing? I mean, were you playing in worship bands? Were you just you know, how did you approach that? How did that define, you know, kind of the niche that you're in?
Um, I think you know, because I grew up. My dad was a pastor, and so I had opportunities early on to play music in church, and definitely there is something. And I really try not to overly. I try not to draw really hard lines, you know. But there's definitely music you would call worship music that I was involved in and really love, you know, especially early in life. You know, I think that as I've grown older, I realized that a worshipful expression or a contemplation, you know, of, you know, a communication or a communion or, you know, with God, with the divine, you know, is is bigger than just one sort of specific type of expression, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
You know, and so early on, I think there were more lines for me. Okay, this is like worship music. This isn't. But I definitely have a foot in sort of the I don't know, you call it the worship world, the gospel world, or you know, the sort of Christian music world. But I've tried really hard over the years, you know, the best I could, just not to draw lines between those two worlds. You know, and I know that is a little bit weird because, you know, for the most part, I feel like, you know, Christian music has become a thing that lives in its own little subculture. and I never felt at home in that subculture, even though I'm a believer, and even though people in that world have been really kind to me and loved my music. I've never felt fully at home there. I've also never felt fully at home in a situation where I can't, where my faith can't be a part of the conversation musically,
Mm-hmm.
And so I've tried really hard just to sort of like, okay, well, I'm going to do my best to ignore it. And I think I end up in this little bit of a middle ground somewhere, and I think that sort of has made its own niche, trying to ignore the, trying to ignore sort of people's idea of what the music is supposed to be. Now, I also understand that like categories exist for a reason. Categories don't define the music, but people need categories to know where to find music. And it's hard to explain something to somebody without a category. So I get why those categories exist, but I really tried really hard to ignore the categories as best I knew how over the years,
Do you think it's trying to just be more honest and being yourself? Is that part of the reason why?
Maybe, I guess it is. I mean, I feel like everybody's trying to do that. I think that what happens is when you have a certain amount of success in a certain area, people tend to, and I understand why they do this, but people tend to want to sort of double down in that area, like, oh, well, this song made a lot of money, I should do that again. But that doesn't felt exciting to me. That's not why I got into music in the first place. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I want to make a living, I want to make money,
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was like early on when How He Loves became a huge success. And by the way, I wrote that song like 8 years before it became, a popular song. And so by the time it became popular, I was, I'd moved on. I'd moved way on. Not that I don't like the song. It's just, it's one of many songs I wrote over the 8-year period of time. And I think people thought like, oh, he's going to do that again. And I was like, well, no, I never intended to repeat that.
Yeah.
Like now, if a similar success happens through something I write, just because I'm writing and, then, I'm obviously, I think that's great. But as far as like trying to make that happen, and people, there's just, you got to do things. I mean, to be honest, like if you want a song to be big in a certain, let's just say in Christian music, you're going to have to do a Christian radio version of the song. And I've submitted songs to both Christian and secular radio, general market radio, and like they're really specific about what they want, And so if you don't make it sound like everything else on the radio, then they're not going to play it. Like there's, I think early on I thought like, oh, I'll just be this outside of the box thing, and if people love it, then they'll play it because people love it. But it's just not true, And so a lot of people, when you have a big radio success, people feel like you have to do it again. And I just didn't want to get addicted to that type of success, because I've got a friend who says, the reward you get for being good at something is you get to do it more, And it's like, well, if I've got to make music that I don't love in order, then
Mm-hmm.
my only, and to be successful, then like my reward is I get to make more music that I don't love. So I've tried my best to ignore that, and just make music that I really, am excited about, that I feel strongly about. So I don't know that it's, I guess it is somewhat about staying true to myself, but I think less on a day-to-day and more like, hey, like if I'm making a lot of money doing this, but I don't like it, I'm just going to have to do it more. So I need to figure out how to become successful at doing something I like, and so for me, I think that's how I've sort of carved my path as an artist.
Awesome. Well, let me ask you this. You said that you haven't done anything but music since 2006.
Yeah.
I want to dig into your story there a little bit and just firsthand what the journey has been like, and kind of what did you learn as a working musician from the early days of doing it to maybe finding a little bit of success and moving on and working on projects. What have you learned? Maybe that if you could go back, from right now and go back then and tell your 2006 self.
I would tell myself that, keep your nose down and just work every day. Because a lot of success comes from doing small things every day, instead of trying to write like, a huge song. I should have just written songs every day,
Hmm.
like, and I feel like I got discouraged, when the truth is, like, I think success comes from making, small, good decisions every single day over long periods of time, and I felt like I was in a race when the truth is I wasn't in a race. It's actually, or to use the race analogy, I'd say it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, and I felt like I was sprinting early on, trying to get something in such a short period of time, and really it's more about, just doing a good job in the right areas for a long, long time, and I wish I had understood that better earlier and not been so. It's not that the ambition was bad, but that I wish I'd been more patient, you know.
Yeah. Well, what did you do when you got to like maybe that first wave of that? What encouraged you to keep going on and move past that?
Um, well, we needed to eat, you know, and so like early on, it's like if I'm not selling CDs out of my car, then we're not paying our bills. So like that's a really good motivator in the early stages. Um, if I don't sell some CDs, I'm gonna have to go get a job at a coffee shop, which it's not a bad job, but so there was, but once I've sort of done the music thing, it's really hard to go back.
Mm.
Not hard to go back as in like it's such an exciting job, but in the sense that like, you know, I at this point I haven't done much else for such a long period of time. This is what I've sort of given my life to. So after you've given a few years and you go out, on the road for a couple of years, like it's hard to go back to doing something else. You're going to have to start from scratch. And so that's a huge motivator. Really just paying the bills was a big motivator.
That and being invested in it.
Yeah, totally.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the medicine. That was kind of for me. That was the first project that you did that I was aware of, and I'm sure that was like your first kind of commercial success album. What that's a very folky album. It's kind of acoustic with a lot of roots based music. What kind of was motivating that at the time?
I don't know. Those just sort of the kind of music we were just into, man. I mean, I was listening to Ryan Adams and Damian Rice and My Morning Jacket, but there's a ton of electric guitar on that record, though. I mean, we have a couple of songs, like Death in His Grave or Philadelphia, and but I think we were listening to Bob Dylan and Springsteen and Ryan Adams and Band of Horses and My Morning Jacket and a lot of those sort of new Southern indie rock type bands.
Well, what was the shift, do you think, past like going into more of that like the Talking Heads type sound or that like dance beat? Uh, I guess you could maybe sum it up like an '80s type sound.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that it was just came from what we were listening to at the time, and what we were into. I think also I'm really often we go in the studio. I like to find a sound that I think is sometimes we don't always do this, but I'm like, hey, what are people not doing? You know, and at the time, I was like, well, no one's doing like rototoms. I was like, so let's get rototoms. I was like, no one's doing Phil Collins right now, so let's do Phil Collins. But also that's what is exciting to us. We're just sitting around. It's like, man, Phil Collins is awesome. Genesis is awesome. Peter Gabriel is awesome. It's like no one is doing this. Maybe we should, And then we went to a pawn shop to buy some guitar strings, and there was a DX7 keyboard for $100. So we bought that, and it's all over the Borderland record, you know. So a lot of times we just get bored with the sound, you know. And then when a lot of people are doing something, it's not that we're trying to be cool, but it's sort of like when there's a lot of people doing the same thing, you know. I always feel like I got to try something different because, you know, otherwise, why do I want to do what everyone else is doing? So you know, and so in Borderland, you know, a lot of that was like, you know, what are people not doing? Let's do that. You
Yeah,
know?
yeah. And it's kind of funny you say that because it wasn't that far behind it. You started seeing a lot of people going that way with their sound.
Yeah, totally,
Yeah.
totally. And I think a lot of people were doing that at the time, you know, looking for new sounds and found, you know, found some energy in the sort of in the 80s. The 80s were so uncool in the early 2000s and the 90s. Like, I remember it being so uncool. But then I also realized, like, when anything reaches the 20-year point, it's not long after the 20-year point when musically things start coming back around, you know. And it's the same when you see like a lot of the music that was happening in the early 2000s. There's a lot of 70s, you know, 60s and 70s influence. You know, there's Led Zeppelin and Eric Clapton, and you have bands like the White Stripes and Jack White and guitar heavy type bands, and you know the Killers, and you know, even though the Killers were tapping the 80s pretty early too, but there are a lot of bands that were reaching back into the 70s, you know, and I think you see that throughout. Like at the 20-year mark, things seem to come back around.
From the perspective of writing music
Mm-hmm.
and accompanying yourself, you know, playing guitar, did you see any kind of shifts there in the way, you know, you were playing music? You know, maybe with like just your acoustic guitar and you're writing a song, but you know, like production wise, you're wanting to do it this way. Are you thinking differently in terms of that? And then when you performing it live, are you changing the way you play? Like, for instance, like playing like the 70s rock type sound versus maybe playing something like the way the Cars played it?
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't know that I'm that intentional. Most of the time, it's more about the vocal, the lyric, and the melody. You know, I don't think about production hardly at all when I'm writing. You know, mostly I'm trying to figure out what the, you know, what type of melody the lyric wants. You know, what type of rhythm is happening in the words. I mean, you know, I think a little bit like I'm listening to Prince a little more. I'm listening to, you know, Tears for Fears, you know, and those melodies will sort of inform what I'm writing. But I don't know that I'm sitting around thinking of production, you know, I mean, and then a lot of times I'll record it and it'll just be a voice memo, or like, you know, for Mercury and Lightning, for instance, we would hold one note out on a keyboard and I would sing all the parts to that. Then we would record the drums, and then we would start trying sounds on top of that to see what we liked. You know, you'd try guitar, like, I like this, don't like it. Or we would try, you know, like an organ, or, you know, we'd create a sound with strings or something like that. So I don't know that I'm thinking about production early on. You know, then there's just, you know, like on Mercury and Lightning, for instance, like there's all types of instruments. We have strings, we have organ, we have Chinese instruments, we have things we built out of percussion, we have sounds we made with the vocals themselves. You know, they can't be reproduced live. So we have to find a new way to do all that when we play it live, just by necessity, you know, and that changes the nature of it a little bit, but it's also a lot of fun to try and figure out, okay, how do we repeat this live since we don't have these particular instruments? You know, we'll use some tracks, or the guitar will take more, you know, of a lead role, or we'll do it with the vocals, or, you know, have a keyboard thing here, you know. Occasionally I'll travel with a string player or, you know, some other musicians. So it just by necessity, though, it changes depending on the venue, you know.
Okay. Well, you mentioned that you and your wife went out and did this very early on. So I want to talk a little bit about like that work life family balance with your work. I mean, what's that like in your life?
Um, I think in a sense, it's the problems are normal problems. The challenges are normal challenges, I should say, not problems, but the challenges are normal in the sense that, you got to go out and you've got to make a living. So probably a lot of my friends, they get up at 6 and they have to drive through traffic to work, and they work 8, 9 hours a day. Some of them who are more demanding jobs, or who are managers or bosses, or who own their own businesses, they're working 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day. They drive home, they get an hour with their kids, and then some of them put their kids to bed and then go back to work. And so it's similar to me, except I'm gone for like a week, and I'll talk to them on the phone, but when I come home I clear some time. So the challenges are like anyone else, like how many days do I want to be out on the road? How much time do I want to put in to touring this season? Do I want to record the record in Portland, Oregon, like I did with Mercury and the Lightning? Do I want to record the record that, like the new Christmas record we're putting out this month? Like I recorded that in my basement, and then in the mountains, my buddy in the mountains of North Carolina recorded a bunch of stuff up there too, you know. So it's tough, but I think it's a challenge everybody faces, especially when you're successful. Like I think there's a fallacy that the more successful you are, the less work there is because you're making more money. But the truth is, the more successful you are, it's like the more there is to keep up with. You have employees and people working for you, and you have stuff pops up and you have to go deal with it, and I think the better you do, the more of a challenge it becomes. And so there has to be more of a discipline to say, all right, I'm going to take a break here. I'm not going to do this. I know it's going to cost me some money if I don't play this show, but I'm not going to do it because I've been too busy, So it's, pretty normal stuff. I think the difference is the frequency, and, I'm gone overnight, and sometimes I'm gone for a couple weeks at a time, but then I try and balance that out with taking, long seasons where I'm not on the road, where I do a lot more work at home, where I spend more time taking the kids to school in the morning and picking them up in the afternoon, and, that kind of stuff, So scheduling, like family stuff, it can be really challenging. And I found like one of the answers to that is just being real intentional with your time and sitting down and scheduling things out, and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And,
Kind of, how do you refill your tank? I mean, because I know it probably, you need a full tank to go out and do that, and then you're probably depleted by the time you are coming home. I mean, what do you do to kind of keep that tank full?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm an extrovert, so I like being out on the road. And probably if I didn't have a family, I would probably stay on the road, But for me, it's about, spending time with people I care about, my wife, my kids. I've got friends in town, And so for me, it's like spending good time with them, going out to dinner, having people over for a barbecue, like that kind of stuff is, my favorite. And then, late night moments where I write songs for fun, like I like to read a lot. I enjoy reading, science fiction. I like Stephen King. I really enjoy classic books. I'm a big fan of Steinbeck. I also read some theology books. I really enjoy some of that kind of stuff. So that kind of stuff, makes me excited about life.
Yeah. So do you find that the reading helps inspire your writing?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Like words, most songs I have, I think, start with a word. Most songs start with, like a word or a phrase. And so the more I read, the more I pick up phrases. And the more I read, the more I find my mind dabbles in words, because I've got words in front of me. And Steinbeck especially is just super inspiring. Not that I steal directly from him. There's some poets I steal from, but more, it's like he inspires me to think. I don't know how to say this. He inspires me with words. So, I read his words and the way he phrases something, and all day long, I find myself phrasing things in similar ways to the way he phrases things, and I think that really charges the engine, so to speak, when it comes to writing songs, because to me, the phrasing of a word is everything.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you think is some uncharted territory in your journey that you would like to explore, maybe and run down?
Yeah. Well, I want to write a kid's book. I'm actually working on a kid's book right now. The whole concept of the kid's book. I can't give you the whole premise because I want to have it published by a publisher, and I don't want to give the premise away because I'm afraid somebody might steal my idea, because I think it's a good idea. But but the idea is teaching kids and adults how to be present. The most important things in life are not the things that happen in your career, or in sports, or in music. The most important things in life are things that happen, in the day to day, in the mundane, with all the people you love on a daily basis. And so I got a book that I think speaks to that. I'm pretty excited about. I'm writing some poetry. I've thought about putting out a couple of poetry books. I really enjoy that because I can get super weird when it comes to just written poetry. I love it. I want to try some new arrangements and experimental live projects. I want to try some things that are more interactive with the crowd. And I've got some ideas about how to make that happen. I don't want to share those specifically yet because I don't want anyone to take my ideas just yet because I haven't tried it out. But I'm thinking of ways to do things to where the crowd feels less like an observer and more like part of the band.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The world between the writing and touring, obviously you've got to enjoy both if you're going to be a working musician. But kind of, if we could delve into the live side for a minute,
Sure.
Talk about your process there and how you think about your show and how you're working with the band, kind of your take on that, and what are you thinking, because you go from songwriter to kind of frontman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I think when you think of a live show, I want to think about the live show as a whole. When you're writing a song, you're really just thinking about the song, but in a live show, you're thinking about where that song fits into the night, and so I want the night to have a statement, and I want it to have a trajectory. So, usually, like, as is typical, we'll often start out with some more up-tempo songs, and we'll just kind of bring just pretty heavy rock and roll for the first, probably first 25% of the set, and then we'll try and go in some new directions, I think that I really, I want to lead people to a certain point by the end of the night. I don't want it just be song, song, song. Like, I want the way the songs are arranged to make as much of a statement as any individual song, Sometimes after, hitting people really hard for a few songs, it's nice to just drop it down to maybe an acoustic song. I mean, all this is pretty common stuff, but there really is a method to it, like I'll pull up a playlist. I'll make a playlist on Spotify and I'll pick the songs I want and I'll arrange them and I'll move them around in different orders to see what feels the best. I think too, like, you want to keep the crowd engaged. That's the whole point of a live performance, is to connect with human beings, And so I think it's important. I try and think about what I'm going to say, how I'm going to invite people into the song. Like, what are people thinking about? How can I, like, trick people into singing with this part of the song? Do I step away from the mic? It's fun to drop a cover song. It's fun to drop some surprises, in the mix. So yeah, I'm always thinking about how the live show can work as a whole.
Yeah. Well, Going back to something you said about having a trajectory, when you've got multiple projects that you've done and they all have their own sound, and then you go live and people want to hear stuff from all of those projects. Do you find any common themes in your music, even though this project was about this project was about this, that kind of runs as a thread that ties all that together?
Yeah, I think almost every record I have, there's a sense of grappling with the unknown, exploring the unknown, the mysteries of life. The medicine is about, hey, something is wrong. Maybe it needs to be fixed, or looking into the future when my, the things that I think are not right will maybe at some point be right. And how does that happen? And man, I don't know. Seeing the world in seeing the world and not liking the way the world works in certain ways, and being frustrated. The medicine and Borderland is like the space in between spaces. I don't quite fit in. What's happening? Where am I going? Where did I come from? Where am I going? Mercury and Lightning is about the things you can't quite get your head around. You can't quite figure it out. You can't quite put your hands on it. And even the new Christmas record that comes out this month, Smile in the Mystery. It's all about, mystery, being comfortable with the mystery and reaching out into the unknown, and I think you see that thread throughout most of my records, even if the unknown is me. Sometimes the unknown is me, like what's going on with me. Sometimes the unknown is God, like what's going on in the invisible mystery of God, and or the unknown is a relationship, like how is this working, like why do I feel this way? Like, what's going to happen? How do you feel? So I think that thread continues throughout all of my work.
Okay. Well, what have you known? What have you learned from those places of the unknown?
Well, I think I've learned a lot, but if I've learned anything, it's that I'm not ever going to really know everything. I'm not really going to know it all, and that I'm a lot happier if I embrace the mystery. It doesn't mean I stop exploring the mystery, but I think I'm a healthier person when I embrace the mystery and find a place of gratitude wherever I am, in whatever part of the process I'm at.
Tell us a little bit about this your new Christmas project.
Yeah, so the new Christmas record is called Smile in the Mystery, and the whole idea is about, the the mystery of Advent. God becomes man. What is that all about? What does that say? What does that mean? That God would sort of stoop to our sort of meager existence, and the way that it happened. It's like, Christ comes through a homeless, baby boy, not a powerful son of a king or some sort of important politician. What does that mean about, how God feels about power and politics and influential people? What's going on here? So, there's a little bit of that mystery and a little bit of that magic. Christmas is full of joy, but also it can be a painful time too. It can be sad in the sense that Christmas is the time when you think about the people you love and you've lost some of them. And it's about appreciating the time that you have with the people, appreciating your time with the people you do have in your life. Your children, they're going to be gone in a few years. They're going to grow up. They're going to have their own lives. Your parents, you love them. And I see my parents getting older, and I hope they live to be 100, but I have to realize I only have so much time with all these people that I love. And Christmas is the time where you clear your schedule and you sit around and you think about that, so it's beautiful, but also there's a little bit of sadness there too, so that's sort of what I think we're, exploring in the new Christmas project. There's some traditional songs, like Joy of the World, Silent Night. There are some songs that are classics that may not be Christmas specific, but like we've done them in a Christmas way, like What a Wonderful World or Make You Feel My Love. And then there's some original songs as well. So yeah, we're pretty excited about it. I think it turned out really well. We had a good time making this record. There's a lot of strings and horns and orchestral moments on the record, and so I feel like it's a really beautiful project. So
Awesome. Well,
awesome,
look
yeah.
forward to checking that out. And thank you so much for coming on the show. And I'm sure our listeners will enjoy it.
All right, hey man, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you so much.